Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar entitled SAP for Mill Products Companies, Transform Your Operations with a Best Practice-Based SAP Solution. I would like to introduce you to today's presenter, Stephen Pasquale, Vice President of Delivery and Solution Principal for Mill Products and Industrial Machinery and Components. Steve has over 25 years of experience in business and IT. And in his role as VP of Delivery, Steve is responsible for helping our team to bring the best skills and resources to each project and ensuring each client's satisfaction with our services. Also joining us on today's webinar is Lorraine Howe. Lorraine is the Vice President of Research and Development and has over 21 years of experience in SAP and has interchangeably been involved in implementing and supporting finance and controlling in various industry sectors, managing projects through their full life cycles. To all attendees, please feel free to type any questions or concerns in the chat, and if we have some time at the end of the presentation, we will get to them at the end. And by the way, my name is Rihanna Thompson, and I will be your moderator. With all the introductions out of the way, Steve, I will turn it over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. So for today's session, what I'd like to go through is the basic issues that face the mill and manufacturing industries in the current world and the evolving economy, how SAP currently and in the future plans to assist their client base to address those, and then the typical challenges that you run into when you're implementing an SAP project and what you can do to overcome those. So with that said, in general, the traditional mill business issues that we've run into tend to focus around supply planning, usually to reduce the cost of production inputs and make sure that the production inputs show up on time. Production line throughput, so reducing the cost per unit, improving the initial quality, improving yield and reducing scrap and waste and reducing line downtime. Inventory optimization, so reducing your storage costs, reducing loss due to age, reducing inventory leakage, reducing the amount of production inputs stored. And then finally, logistics excellence. So delivering on time to quality at the ordered amounts at the lowest cost possible so you can avoid penalties and meet or exceed customer expectations. One of the big challenges typically in mill is, as a business, it's a single-digit margin business, and any deviation in these areas can actually make that margin even smaller. What is happening is there's becoming a very big change in the industry. There are different competitors showing up. There's a ton of global uncertainty in terms of the ability to purchase or sell without having to face duties. There's a lot of risk of trade wars. Barriers are going up constantly between markets. And the other thing is there's a lot of companies that are, in some cases, over capacity due to this reduction in demand. There's also demand shifts. So there's a move towards mobility, the decarbonization model, and the new plastics economy. And what's meant by the new plastics economy is basically there are substitute products for traditional mill outputs that can be generated using a plastic or a 3D printing model, which makes things like milling, where you're actually taking a large chunk of product and shrinking it down to something consumable, a little bit more challenging. And the problem with this new plastics economy is it has very quick turnaround and can very quickly pivot much faster than traditional milling can. The other thing that we're seeing emerge is the whole digitalization and e-commerce packaging and bio-based materials. So these, in addition, are also introducing threat to traditional mill industries. The other thing we're finding is that there's an increasing need for mill providers to be able to do business to consumer. So the traditional model for most mill services has been a business-to-business model. What we're seeing now is a lot of mill companies are trying to create a direct relationship with their end customers to be able to better meet their needs, as well as to remove a cost layer of a distribution level. And the final thing is really determining how to gain competitive advantage from data. So one of the things that's a common buzzword out there is big data. What big data really means is most, especially in the milling world, most mills have a ton of data. There are a bunch of data points that they capture, and it creates this big, large blob of information. The real trick is, how do I get valuable insight out of that data and to be able to do things like really determine what's going on at my shop floor level, really understand what my costing model is, really understand where the pain points are in the shipping model. And again, driving towards that customer excellence, which is really becoming the focus of the economy, if you think about it, is everything is about satisfying your customer and keeping them retained. The other thing is a drive to be able to achieve your strategic business imperatives. So again, the thing that's changing is really that sense of customer centricity within the milling space and the ability to differentiate your brand by being able to offer your products the way that people expect them, at the price they expect them, at the quality level they expect them, and allow them to be able to find them through multiple different avenues. The other thing that is a strategic imperative for most mills is to be able to run smart factories. So in the old days, a shop floor level would have a shop floor supervisor that understood the process front to back. What we're finding now is that there's a real risk of having that knowledge reside within an individual. Really, you want a factory that's able to treat itself like a publisher of information to the organization. And by doing that, you get to maximize the uptime of the shop floor by being able to see where there's degradation points in the shop floor and to be able to address those quickly. Achieving energy efficiency, so often in mill, one of the biggest costs is the cost of energy running into the mill. So being able to tell that your machines are running effectively, that they're consuming the least amount of energy as possible, and then optimizing your quality with the real-time predictions and analytics. So one of the things that typically mill is faced with is making sure that they don't overbuy or underbuy. Overbuying results in an inventory bloat, whereas underbuying may have long lead times that impact your ability to deliver unless you pay a penalty to fast-track the raw materials into your business. Also supporting new business models and expanding across industry boundaries. So one of the things that's happening is a lot of businesses are starting to put value-added services on top of their mill business. The mill business is a high-cost business, low margin, and so what we're finding is a lot of mills are trying to put value-add services on top of those products that they sell with a higher margin level on them to basically make it a more profitable business. So there's a lot of businesses that are cutting across other models to try and drive new services, new value, consumption of new products. So that's really a value-added piece. And again, understanding the way the market's evolving and what your business needs to do to be able to achieve that is an important part of understanding the data that exists in your organization. And then automating processes and empowering workers to optimize profitability. So again, if in the context of a mill, if someone is overseeing a line and can see that one of the mill lines is less profitable or less effective than the others, that gives them the ability to adjust those lines and make recommendations. So the problem in most of today's mill organizations is they tend to be running with older systems that have less functionality, and the only place that all that information can be aggregated effectively is in a data warehouse, which is only populated every so often. One of the advantages of modern ERPs is they do have the ability to, through in-memory computing, generate real statistics in real time that can actually, you can make a change to the line and see the impact immediately. So that is one of the major benefits of having a single integrated ERP that has the ability to perform in-memory computing. The other thing is to support your tactical business needs. So the ability to deliver the best customer experience possible. So getting notifications immediately when there's a customer that the delivery didn't occur when it was supposed to, or that the customer indicates they're dissatisfied with the process. And I'm sure everybody on this call at some point has been asked to rate either a product or a delivery model by giving it 1 to 5 stars. That's the concept that this has. Gaining real-time insight into customer buying patterns. So as the economy continues to evolve, customers are changing their buying patterns. One of the challenges, again, is to be able to understand that in an older architecture, you wind up having to go into a data warehouse and basically run analytics on it to determine what the pattern was. But by the time you do that, the customer may have again changed their buying patterns. So rather than be retrospective, you can actually do real-time evaluations of customer buying patterns with the newer ERP. Performing supply and demand planning. So again, on a cyclical basis, keeping on top of what your demand profile is, how you're going to meet that with supply, and then feeding that into your production process. A holistic view of all inventory. So this is one of the emerging trends in a lot of industries, is vendor managed inventory is becoming a very common practice for a lot of mill companies. And so what this holistic view allows you to do is see all the inventory that currently belongs to you as an organization, regardless of where it sits. So whether it sits with a 3PL, whether it sits inside of a retail facility, this would allow you to be able to have that holistic view. The other nice thing is that it also gives you the ability to go to wherever that inventory is stored, reevaluate the inventory on an inventory count, and potentially restock that location. Another real advantage from a tactical perspective is getting real-time insights into costs and revenue. So having the ability to tell on any given day whether or not a given production line is meeting expectations in terms of the cost of production, the time it takes to produce, the end cost of the final product, and then real insight into production performance. So this is really about machine efficiency, uptime, all that good stuff, and real-time insight into logistics performance. So is the logistics process following the expected path and timeline and effort that you would plan on? And then the final thing is tools to make products available to non-traditional customers. In the milling space, what we're seeing start to emerge is the need for a marketplace amongst a lot of mill companies. The objective being to put their surplus either input products up for sale or output products that are overflow, or also to list products from their partners and customers within that marketplace as well. So really the ability to have a clearinghouse for all the products that either come in or go out of that particular mill. So one of the things that typically happens in a conversation with a mill company around ERP is lots of horror stories in the market. We've heard that there's problems with ERP, whether it be Oracle or SAP or Microsoft. There's lots of implementation issues. There's lots of stories about overtime and over budget. There's lots of stories about solution adoption issues or resistance to adoption. The business results that were originally cast in the business case don't actually show up at the back end of the process, and then the cost of maintenance, support, and upgrades. So these are all valid concerns. There's a bunch of reasons as to why they exist, which we'll go through in the next few minutes. So on implementation issues, what we typically find is sort of lessons learned out of companies that have struggled is they typically try and bite off more than they can chew in the first phase. So the way that I phrase it with most organizations is implementing an ERP that's integrated, so it cuts across all of your business, is probably one of the single biggest changes you can make to your business. It's going to touch everybody's job. It's going to touch every process you have. It's going to touch every system you had. So there's a lot of change. What we suggest is basically creating what we call a minimum viable scope. So a minimum viable scope is the smallest level of project that you can implement to solve your initial problems and impact your business the least in terms of an overall disruption. What this does is it allows you to control your rollout. It allows you to gain an appreciation of what it takes to implement the thing. And it doesn't cause you to do a big bang with full scope, which if it's unsuccessful, you have to roll back to the old construct. So it's really a risk mitigation strategy. The other thing we find from an implementation perspective is each software product has its own particular bias as to how it wants to be implemented. Some products are really toolkits that allow you to basically tailor that product to do whatever you want it to do. So for people that just want to redo exactly what they're doing today, those products are probably the best. Now they bring a lot of other issues in terms of maintenance, support, and upgrade, but they have the lowest amount of change management. There are products such as an SAP, which over time, so SAP has been around since the late 70s, and over time, SAP has implemented what they call best practices or industry standard practices. The nice thing for mill clients is that SAP's basic foundation for the current version is actually the mill footprint. So they've actually used their mill products solution and made it the core of the larger SAP product. So what that means is that SAP has best practices delivered, and a best practice is simply a set of processes that if you populate them with data, will actually transact right out of the box in SAP. And that best practice is based on what they have seen in the industry over the thousands of clients they have, and it typically applies to what I'll call sort of non-value add processes, is where the best fit tends to be with most organizations. So things like accounts receivable, things like accounts payable, things like procurement, purchasing, all those things. So the theory with an SAP is that where the product is now, if you're prepared to adopt the way that they roll out these best practices, it can actually greatly reduce the amount of time it takes to implement the product. And this is a recent thing. So anybody that's on an older version of SAP, like the ECC6 product, these best practices were nowhere near as robust. This has really come about in the last 4 or 5 years. And actually, there is a SAP Solution navigator that anybody can get onto where you can go and look at the best practices. So if you search that on the web, you'll actually wind up coming up with the web interface that shows you. And then you can click into the business process flows and see how those work. But what that basically does is says, if I implement these best practices, then I just have to do a change management exercise in my organization. And the focus on the best practices is really on the things that don't drive value for your organization. So the commodity process, the things that don't differentiate you or make you unique. So the theory is that the implementation issues against that kind of thing should be fairly small because the effort to turn them on is much lower than it used to be. And then where the project should focus from an implementation perspective is on that secret sauce of your organization. So as an example, one of our clients is known in the marketplace for having exactly what everybody wants 100% of the time. They do this by overstocking, but it's their value to the marketplace. So figuring out what that best practice, so the non-best practice really core value effort is, and focusing your implementation effort on that is where you derive the most value. So that's really how you sort of counteract those implementation issues. You figure out what the secret sauce is, focus on that, and the rest of it just becomes a change management exercise. Over time and over budget is another one that you quite frequently hear. So again, core best practice adoption, pushback on the processes delivered out of the box. So where we've seen best practices adopted most successfully is in an organization where the leadership says, we're doing this project for the following reasons. One of the reasons is that we need to simplify our business, increase our consistency, and we plan to do that through the best practices that are delivered by SAP. So, you know, what that does is that really gives you the ability to manage that adoption and constrain down the time and the budget. Then the other two big areas that we run into over time and over budget is the master data effort. So the conversion of data from legacy systems is often underestimated when businesses go to put together a business case. They often underestimate the amount of time it takes to do it and the amount of person hours that it requires to do the work. And so we strongly suggest that people start looking at their data, and even before you hit the street with an RFP, you understand the condition of your data, how much data you actually have, so that you can sort of put that out as part of an informed RFP process. The other thing we see is an inadequate OCM budget. And again, this is not uncommon, especially if you're in an organization that has had the same system for 20 years. So the last time anyone made this kind of change was 20 years ago, where the model used to be you would just modify the software to do whatever your business did. In the world where the software products are evolving at an incredibly fast rate, so right now, originally SAP had a major release every few years, 2 years for what I'll call a middling release and 5 to 10 years for a major release. Now SAP is releasing a major release once a year, as are all the other software providers. So the pace in the market has shifted to such a degree that you can't sit back and implement something custom, because you'll sit there and have to be constantly redoing it every year, or you'll fall behind on the software. And if one of the reasons you bought the software was to accelerate your business, you're kind of defeating the purpose by overextending it. So what that then does is says, okay, if I'm going to adopt this software the way it's delivered out of the box, it really becomes more of an OCM exercise. So really managing your people's understanding of what the desired outcomes are, how the system supports those, training them on the software, reinforcing the behaviors that you want to see, and really making sure that they're prepared when the new system's turned on and they buy in to start using it right away. So that's one of the things that we find a lot of clients don't budget adequate time for. And training people is not organizational change management. It is for sure a component of it, but really OCM needs to be assessed from an effectiveness perspective. How effective is this end user at executing the new processes and transactions? And there's lots of tools out there that allow you to do that assessment. SAP has one of its own called Enable Now, where basically a user can go in and execute their transactions, and you can monitor their effectiveness and efficiency at that transaction. And then as part of your business readiness, you set that as a target. Business results not being achieved. So generally speaking, if the first 3 bullets occur, you're probably not going to hit those business results. So if you invest too much cost in the system, you don't plan adequately for your data conversion, your OCM, you don't execute your OCM well and you have to inject more cost, it blows your business case. So it's a pretty simple cause and effect. If you get the first 3 right, number 4 will probably show up. If you don't, there'll be an erosion in the business results that you're expecting. And then the other thing is the cost of maintenance and support and upgrade issues. So back in the earlier days of SAP, there was a bunch of mill implementations that went on in the oil patch in Canada, where effectively most people created a new legacy system. What they discovered was the maintenance, support, and upgrade costs were massive every time SAP issued a new release, and the same is true of Oracle. And so there was another round of what I'll call industry redo of SAP, where most of the oil and gas companies reverted back to, as close as possible, SAP best practices. So learning that lesson out of the gate and just making sure that you understand when you want to extend the product, that the business value is actually there to do that extension. So, again, focusing on really what is the value proposition to your business and what drives your business and what makes it attractive to your customers. So why is it better now? So from an SAP specific perspective, there are in the newest version, which currently is SAP 1809, there's going to be a 19 release this year. There are a large number of mill-specific best practices implemented. So in the production area, there's a significant amount of new best practices. In the costing area, there's a significant amount of new best practices. In the demand and supply planning side, there's significant tools available as well. So really, SAP is improving its functionality, and it continues to evolve that functionality on a yearly basis. And it really is, SAP is making massive investments both on the functionality of the product as well as the toolkits and extending the reach of mill companies to be able to make them more integrated with their ecosystem. I mean, in the old days, it used to be very much, I got a sales order, I produce to the sales order, I deliver. Now it's really becoming, how do I get in front of demand, anticipate changes to demand, and also make suggestions to my client base about products that they may not even know they need. So again, using Amazon as a simple example, I'm sure most people have gone up to Amazon, they purchase something, and then you get an email from Amazon saying, hey, based on your buying patterns, we think you should invest in the following. So that's really the way the world is going, is to generate demand using your consumption patterns. In terms of the improved technical tools, so one of the things that SAP has that is a big value is really the in-memory computing. And what that does is it allows you, if you're an organization where 80% of your data is going to exist in the ERP, it basically allows you to perform what used to be considered a data warehouse function, real-time, in-memory, on a daily basis. So you don't even run a report. All you do is you pull up an application that shows you what would typically have previously been contained in a report. It's also delivering an out-of-the-box Internet of Things toolkit. So an example of an Internet of Things solution would be something like a vendor-managed inventory. So you go to a client site and you scan your own inventory balances. Machine monitoring is an Internet of Things opportunity. So there's a bunch of tools that SAP is delivering to build out those frameworks. And as I said, SAP is rapidly evolving the functionality. So from their major clients, they're constantly getting feedback about what's changing. And they're effectively releasing, as I said, every year. So right now, there are large releases containing significant functionality improvements every year. Now, the advantage of the way SAP does that, using something called their switching framework, is it allows you to take the technical upgrades. So you basically onboard that functionality, but you don't have to turn it on. So then on a case-by-case basis, you can activate the business functionality, do the OCM that goes along with it, and implement it. So you're not forced into adopting all the changes at once, but you install them and then start to go through the exercise of populating them and releasing them. There is the ability to audit procurement now, collaboration using blockchain. They're also releasing more and more conversational voice interfaces and machine learning tools. And then there's a bunch of digital manufacturing. So there's a complete cloud MES and MII solution for manufacturing that can be implemented. And again, that gets down to monitoring and executing efficiently in the manufacturing space. There's also been significant improvements in the implementation approach and the methodology. So really moving towards the best practices approach, minimizing the initial footprint, all those good things are really making, I would say, for a much higher level of success. We're seeing in pragmatically run projects where you don't try and bite the whole thing in one shot, I would say that the amount of horror stories has dropped significantly. There are significantly less issues post go live than there used to be. Again, that's a combination of tools, methodology involvement, and the best practices that are delivered by SAP. really that best practices piece is one of the ways that SAP is trying to address complaints over long-running projects by saying, here are all these, turn them on, and you can actually transact tomorrow. There's also, I would say, SAP has now got a ton of mill implementation experience, and what that does is that allows them to draw on how to better plan and manage projects, and also with our focus on mill being one of our verticals, we have a significant understanding of where the typical issues are in mill and continue to evolve our methodology to be able to address those. In terms of mill-specific best practices, so SAP delivers end-to-end processes, so really your effective supply chain, your procure-to-pay, your supply-demand, order-to-cash, standard industry-based, your maintenance routines. These are pretty typical business processes. Within these, SAP has actually deployed out a set of process flows to a very granular level. So, for example, in the engineered order space, so if you have someone that's buying a custom product from you, there's a process for the engineer to order, there's a process for engineer to stock, there's a process for manufacturer to stock, there's a process for manufacturer to order. There's actually, I believe now, there is close to 1,000 individual process flows covering the whole spectrum of what SAP sees as being mill. So what does SAP see as being mill? So really the scope that SAP covers for mill is business planning, intelligent manufacturing, digital logistics, asset management, and sustainable customer relationships. In support of that, there's a bunch of activities around finance, procurement, and the core HR piece. So really, the business planning is all about supply and demand management and planning, really looking at it holistically across your organization. So one of the challenges that we frequently hear in mill is each plant understands what it does, but holistically across the organization, it's not understood. And there may be the ability to shift demand or supply around. There may be the ability to supply out of different plants than we currently are if the cost makes sense. So really developing that holistic understanding of the business. From a manufacturing perspective, one of the things we often hear is that a lot of mill industries basically integrate themselves using spreadsheets or some similar tool. So effectively what happens coming out of manufacturing is the consumption gets shipped over to the planning team, who then ships something over to procurement. So there's no holistic view of that whole consumption pattern driving planning, driving the procurement piece, and making sure that that's constantly reevaluated. So that's one of the big advantages with an integrated solution like SAP is the positive is it allows you to have a holistic view. The negative is that if you don't follow the processes delivered, you can stop a downstream process by not executing your step in SAP. Then in terms of digital logistics, you've got yard and warehouse management being done using scanning with barcodes. There's transportation management delivered out of the box where, again, you can keep track of your transportation costs, the most efficient transportation route. There's the whole track and trace logistics networks piece, and there's the order promising capability. So again, if you understand where your supply of inputs is, how long it'll take you to produce it, how long it'll take you to ship it, then you should be able to promise a delivery date. Then the whole piece around asset management. So again, depending on what type of mill you are, and especially this is critically important in terms of asset management in the process-based manufacturing industry, where you have a continuous process like rolling paper, rolling steel, a bunch of those type of linear processes, where a machine downtime basically means a large machine is down for a period of time. If that machine is pumping out thousands of feet of something, that's a major loss. And then the asset operations and maintenance. So again, monitoring the equipment to make sure that it's operating within tolerances so that you get in front of it, schedule proactive maintenance. And then sustainable customer relationships. So the seamless omni-channel commerce that we're talking about, an omni-channel customer service, basically having multiple ways to request your product, having multiple ways to request your service, allowing people to serve themselves. I mean, most people these days don't go into a bank to use a bank teller. Most of us now bank online and would prefer rather not to deal with a human because the system is typically more efficient than the person is. Configuring pricing and quoting to cash, so that's obviously in the mill space, can be a high opportunity. So people come in and say, I want something 10 feet long by 24 inches wide by an inch deep, made out of this material, then you give them a quote. Automating the sales force, so again, the whole process of sales interactions, this is a pretty commonly understood model. It's delivered out of the box with SAP. Tracking the performance of your sales organization. One of the things that's interesting around the Salesforce automation and the sales performance management is really the ability to effectively use your salespeople only in the situations where you really need human interaction. So that whole digital front end to the sales process really only forces the engagement of a salesperson if there's something that falls outside the process. And what that allows you to do is really reduce your sales force from a bunch of feet to the street to really people that excel at facilitation, customer satisfaction. So you can decrease your cost of your sales force and really drive up the value that that sales force delivers. And then using marketing as a growth driver. So if you understand the demand patterns, or you understand that there are some products or services embedded within your process that could be exposed to the market, SAP delivers tools to be able to do that. From the finance side, really one of the big ones that we find in terms of the finance side is really the financial planning, the financial operations, the asset accounting, and also visibility into collections and payables. And one of the important things is costing. So SAP delivers extensive ability to track costs from a manufacturing perspective, from a raw material perspective, equipment perspective, human contribution. One of the challenges with SAP is really to make sure that you don't over-engineer that and have too many measurement points, but SAP gives you the ability to measure to a great level of depth. So that all gets tracked in the finance and controlling side. Procurement, again, there's the ability, and this comes up quite often, I find, with milling clients. So there's some mill industry groups that typically have sourcing requirements where you have to buy from certain providers, you have to have certain quality expectations met. So if you implement the full range of SAP's procurement model, then you basically wind up with an end-to-end procurement process with traceability as to when this product gets output, what exactly was the source supplier and the batch that it came from. So if that's a need for your business, SAP does deliver the ability to manage that extensively throughout the process and to report on it. It also gives you the ability to procure services and treat those services as if they're part of your production process. So they operate basically as an outsourced extension of your arm. Delivers inventory, both inventory management being the ability to look at a building with a bunch of bins, warehouse management being the ability to have levels in the bin. And then we also offer advanced warehouse management, which has some very robust features that not a lot of people typically need. Mostly it shows up in companies that have got warehouses over massive spaces, someone like a DuPont, for example. There's also supplier collaboration. So one of the things I mentioned earlier was the ability to put people's surplus products up into a marketplace where you can actually take a commission on that. That's one of the things that's driven by supplier collaborations. One of the interesting things that SAP's done in the new S4 product, which covers the last 5 years or so, is they've introduced a concept called a business partner. So in most software, you have a kind of business partner called a vendor. You can have one called a partner, you can have one called a third-party outsourcer, and each of those has its own file. So you could actually have the same business appearing in 3, 4, 5 different files. What SAP's done is they've converted the concept of basically it's a business partner now is what it's called, and the business partner that you can have many relationships. You can buy from them, you can sell to them, you can share services with them. So SAP's now come across with this business partner where you just basically manage relationships. So the partner only exists once, and you have multiple different business relationships with them. So that allows you to actually become very effective at managing your relationship with your business partners to drive as much value out of it as you can. And then the other thing that SAP has is procurement analytics. So you can set up a bunch of what I'll call measurements against your vendor pool, and you can basically constantly evaluate them on those analytics. And those analytics get much like you see on a hockey game or a basketball game. Those analytics in the S4 world get updated with every transaction that you execute with that vendor. So it is real-time procurement analytics and gives you a real sense of how the performance is going. And then finally, the piece about managing the human part of your business. So really the core human resources piece, so onboarding your employee, making sure they've got the skills they need, then tracking the time that they're booking against work so you can cost that work effectively, and doing your analytics to determine if your people are being effective. So that all comes out of the box in 1809, which is the current version. So the planned innovation specifically for Mill, and there's actually a massive document on this that is available to anybody that wants to search it on SAP's website. But basically, if I was to summarize it up, there's a real focus on demand management and insight. There's a real focus on sales, inventory, and operations planning. There's also a focus across, looking across the organization holistically. So the whole portfolio and project management. So not just viewing a line, viewing an organization and drilling through that organization down into the performance of a plant, of a line, of a machine, of a human. Enabling smart connected businesses through the business network collaboration. So again, as much as possible, removing the human integration from the process and allowing transactions to flow across the ERP as well as across to the integrated partners that you have in that process. As I mentioned earlier, the increased auditing and procurement collaboration using blockchain, the conversational voice interfaces, and then the MES and MII solutions. So that's really the functionality piece. The other thing that's changing is the user interface. So historically, SAP has had, people have claimed that it's not a great interface. Part of the reason for that is SAP was trying to deliver a lot of data in a single UI. That is now changing. So SAP has rolled out 2 products that come natively delivered with the software at no extra cost. One of them is Personas, which allows you to basically take a screen. So if you look at the left, there's a payment screen which has 37 fields on it. Personas allows you to trim it down so that per user you can say, okay, this user only needs 4 fields. This user needs 11 fields. So what it does is it really allows an end user to be effective because they're only dealing with the data that's important to their part of the transaction. The other move that SAP has made is they've released something called Fiori. So Fiori is an HTML5 based tool that allows SAP to basically create what looks like a very familiar look and feel. So on the left is an example of a Launchpad, which is a tab-based interface. And what this does is it effectively publishes a bunch of meaningful statistics related to a business area. So you can see there's numeric values in them, there's graphs in them. And then if you want to get the detail behind what's being presented in the tile, you double click into the tile and it takes you to that middle screen, where effectively now you're looking at an invoice. You've actually got a summary on the left-hand side of some of the invoice values, and then it shows you the specific one at the top on the right side. And the other thing you can get also is a bar graph like the one on the right. And again, within memory computing, you can actually sit and look at this bar graph if it's a small enough time slice, and you can actually see the bars fluctuate as things change. And with that visibility through the Fiori solution, what they basically deliver you is a transactional base. So this is someone doing a task, inputting data. They deliver you analytical insights, which is basically allowing you to see patterns like things like DSO, inventory turns, average delivery times, things like that. And it's all driven by role. So basically, a tile of this type will exist for every role in your business. So a purchasing approver will see one set of tiles, a procurement approver will see a different set of tiles, accounts receivable will see a different set of tiles. And then the other thing that they produce is what's called a fact sheet. So these 3 basically are the main categories. And the fact sheet basically gives you the ability to look at some contextual information, but it's not really designed to make real-time business decisions. So the other thing that we talked about is, okay, now you've bought the product, how do you deliver it in a way that basically meets the expectations of your stakeholders and delivers on the business values that you committed to delivering? So our approach is really, we focus on a very limited number of industries, 4. So we focus on mill, which is taking a lump of something and making it something smaller. IM&C, which is industrial machinery and components, which is the assembly of a bunch of little things into bigger things. Mining, and then construction. So we have principles over each of those industries, and those principles bring to bear numerous years of experience in the industry. So I've got, for example, I've got about 20 years of experience now with mill and IM&C. The mining fellow has got about 15 years, I believe. So these are people that understand the business model, not just the software that's being applied to it. And what that allows us to do is work with our prospective clients to come up with a pragmatic approach to delivery. So basically focus on the things that are important to drive your business, those things that are going to hurt you or help you. Really develop a plan that is faster and leaner, so drive value as early as possible, and then focus on continuous improvement. One of the issues I would say with the big implementations of the 70s and 80s is they focused on trying to deliver all the value at the very end of the project. The continuous improvement model is actually a better way to go, because what we've discovered pretty consistently is as our clients put in their first phase, they actually wind up morphing their second phase, because the first phase gives them insight that the things they thought were true were actually only partially true. And there were things they didn't know that caused them to change the thought behind their phase 2. So we find that it delivers value earlier to do smart, short, sharp bursts, and it also causes you ultimately to deliver a better solution because you evolve your thinking between the phases. The other thing is that we use a change matrix process to basically drive an understanding and then deliver on those expectations. And by understanding, we don't just mean we want to reduce costs. By understanding, we mean we want to reduce our days sales outstanding by 15%, right? So that does feed back to the value chain, but it's a very specific measurable. And then against that, we then wind up looking at the processes delivered out of the box and say, is what we're going to get out of the box, does it deliver that value, or is there some change we need to make to realize that 15% value? So we really focus on business results, driving back into the software as opposed to the software imposing itself on the business. And then SAP has changed its methodology a bit. It has rebranded it to be called Activate. Activate is a little bit more agile based than the old SAP methodology used to be, and it is very much based on starting off with a best practice. We've then added some measurement gates to that give it a little bit, what I would say, a little bit more frequency of measurement to make sure that we're actually delivering on the expectations and the business value. And then in addition to the SAP best practices, we also have our own intellectual property that we've built to service the industries. So we have a My Work Order application that we built. We've got a bunch of things that we built out that we can also bring to the table that further enhance that solution. So really, at the end of the day, what needs to happen is before going live with one of these big implementations, your business needs to be confident that the business is ready to both deliver what it committed to as well as the business value. And that readiness really drives it into a couple of different pillars of information. So given that your people are the one typically executing the work, you need to make sure that they're comfortable with the solution and being able to execute on it. You want to make sure that your process has been evolved and absorbed so that if you're using SAP's best practice process, everybody needs to be aware of it, everybody needs to know how to use it, it's ready to go. Then the solution and software is built. And I can generally say that of the implementations that I'm aware of where there's been an issue with the final delivery, almost never has it been because of the software. The software now is so robust that it's usually not a software issue, it's usually either an execution issue or a OCM issue. Then make sure that your data is successfully loaded and validated. And it doesn't mean that your data loads have to be perfect, but it does mean you should run it multiple times and that you should have defined a level of acceptable quality errors. So no one's ever going to get it right 100%. No data I've ever seen has been cleansed perfectly 100%. But you get to the point where you say 90% of the data for 90% of our clients is clean, we're comfortable, then you're good. And then is the infrastructure and site readiness. So basically what you should do as part of your project at the outset, define what you think the measurements are that you're going to measure across these 5 pillars and constantly reevaluate them as you get through each gate so that by the time you go live, you don't have to do a large assessment. You can actually say, okay, we got through the gates for each of these, we're ready to roll. And one of the things I wanted to emphasize is that if you look at this study, so this study was a Fortune 500 CIO study done by Deloitte, just recently, actually, about 2-3 years ago, I think. And what it clearly points out is the things in green are all the OCM issues. So 7 out of 10 projects fail due to change management related issues, not software issues. And if you look at what the other ones are, the other 3 blues, poor project management, so again, that's within the project, it's not really related to the software. Not keeping scope under control, this is a very common one because one of the things that happens, especially in organizations that have not done this in a while, is everybody assumes there's only going to be one kick at the cat. So they try and jam everything into that one project, and it just causes the project to bleed on and on. So that's why back a few slides ago when I was talking about embracing that continuous improvement model, what we suggest is that you display a roadmap to your people and say, here's where we are on the journey. And you constantly update that roadmap and show them that you're continuing to move. If you do that, it really reduces that scope expansion piece. And then the siloed view of the world. So IT perspective not being integrated or the business perspective not being integrated. But most of the issues tend to be around resistance, inadequate organizational sponsorship, unrealistic expectations. And one of the things that we run into constantly is people expect human throughput to be faster with the new system. And I would argue that it's probably actually not as fast because you're asking people to collect much more data because that data has value to you. The other thing is, day one after you've implemented a new system, people are not going to be as effective as they were on a system they've been using for 15 or 20 years. It's just a case of fact. So these are the things that we ask you to address. And really from an OCM perspective, if you look at it, if you get everything above at the top, so people are aware of the change, they want to change, they understand the change, they're able to change, and you constantly reinforce the behaviors in the training, the change will be successful. If any one of those things doesn't appear, or multiple of them don't appear, you wind up with all sorts of disruption. So in those yellow balls on the right, you can see, if you don't have awareness, then people are confused. Why are we doing this? I don't understand. If they don't want to change, they're just going to dig in their heels and say, I really love the old system better, I don't want to do this. If they don't have knowledge, so they don't feel like they can execute well. And a good example is, we had a client who did an evaluation of their employees' ability to transact in the system. And the very last question was, if your manager was standing over your shoulder, would you be comfortable transacting? I think there were 20 people that got asked that question. I believe only one said yes. But the one before that, which said, are you comfortable transacting in the system alone? The answer was yes. So you just need to make sure that you understand what you're asking and what your expectations are around that. But if everything executes well, then you've covered off that first part of the whole readiness for business go live. And so to do that, we basically suggest that you follow a pretty structured method of OCM and that you monitor across each of these boxes what your criteria are indicating that you've accomplished. So visioning is really what's the vision for the end state. Stakeholder engagement and alignment is everybody that's going to be affected by the change, which arguably in most organizations for ERP is 100% of the people, is engaged, and you're working to keep them aligned as the change evolves. That whole organizational alignment, so understand how you're going to measure your success, communicate, learn and support, and then sustain and constantly reinforce post-go live. One of the things that we see happen sometimes is people don't reinforce the need to keep transacting in the system post-go live, and processes get stuck. So we actually deliver a bunch of tools allowing you to monitor whether the process is stuck, but that's very, very common. When people go from disintegrated systems to an integrated software product, they don't understand that if they don't do their part, the person in the next part of the phase can't do their thing. So if you don't, for example, confirm a production order as done, then the product can't move to inventory inside SAP. So the product sits in limbo, sitting inside the manufacturing process. So what we have is we actually have our own methodology that we've mapped against SAP's launch methodology. So at the top is launch, which is prepare, explore, realize, deploy, and support. And then below that is what activities occur in each phase of SAP's life cycle that were related to it. So that was all the content I wanted to go through. I think we can open it up for questions with the 12 minutes remaining.
Perfect, and we have a few questions ready for you, Steve. The first question is from Ravi. How do we get more information on B2C solutions currently available or on the roadmap?
So we can actually provide you with that. So specifically for small and medium businesses, Lorraine, who's on the call as well, and the head of the solution architecture group, John by the name of Steve Thomas, we actually maintain a matrix of all the solutions across all the categories. So for B2C, we actually have a list of the solutions and what we would recommend for the mid-size market. So as most people know, SAP has a lot of products. There's typically 10 ways to solve a problem, and it depends on how much of a problem it is for you and how much you're prepared to invest in it. So in the B2C space, there's multiple different ways you can do things. You can go all the way up to Ariba and Hybris, which are very large products, offer tons of functionality. We generally find in the mid-market, it's tough to justify that kind of spend. So what Lorraine and Steve Thomas do is they basically, for each of these business problems, have a matrix of the recommended products that go against that. So we can easily provide that to you.
So to add to that, Steve, we haven't talked a lot about the SAP Cloud Platform and all the solutions that are available there that kind of supplement. And in fact, they did come up in the discussion today, but they weren't highlighted as such. But there are solutions out there that would facilitate a to see environments. So customer portal, for example, there are capabilities in the cloud platform to develop very simply, actually, your own portal, your own web portal for customers. So there are those solutions as well, which we find a little bit less expensive than the bigger solutions that Steve just mentioned, like Ariba and Hybris.
Okay. Next question.
Okay, thank you both. Next question is from Richard. What specific dashboards does Illumiti have identifying incoming materials, produced materials, and customer demand/forecast?
So there are a bunch of Fiori tiles around that and analytics around that that we can provide. So if you give us the contact information, we can actually send you screenshots of them. There's a whole bunch, especially in the newer versions of S4, so 1809 and the new 19, which allow you visibility into the production process, as well as to drill into the step in the process to indicate what's available and what's not. So there's a lot more visibility. And again, this is a direct result of the move to HANA, which is the in-memory computing platform, as well as the new S4 model. With the ability to now monitor in real time, because the computing speed is so much faster than doing it on disk, it actually can go and, when you ask for updates, so two ways to do it. You can go ask for an update, it'll extract it right away, or you can leave the tile up and actually monitor the dashboard, and there's a production dashboard, and you can see where things are in the process. You can do the same thing with inventory levels. So there's a bunch of those different tiles. So if you, sounds like you gave a list to Rihanna, so we can get back to you with images of what those tiles look like.
Next question from Brian. What is Illumiti's experience with secondary wood manufacturing?
So if by secondary wood manufacture, you mean post the initial log stage and now it's semi-finished good and assembled. So we have several clients that are in that business. So basically taking secondary sort of semi-finished goods and milling them down. So we have a fair bit of experience in that space, and actually we have two more prospects in exactly that space that we're talking to right now.
Next question from John. How would a mill products company leverage IoT or the Internet of Things?
So I'll take the first cut at this, and then Lorraine can kick it even further down the road. The typical demand that we see for IoT today, and that's not saying it's the right thing for the future, but for today, the typical IoT things that we see are really around the monitoring of the equipment, the monitoring of transportation logistics, and also the sales process and the vendor managed inventory process. Those seem to be the four that we hear being talked about the most. Lorraine may have some other ideas.
Yeah, actually, Steve, you covered quite a lot of those in some of the 1809 best practices that SAP has brought out. For example, the Manufacturing Intelligence Integration and Analytics Solution, or otherwise known as MI, is a place where IoT is leveraged a lot in terms of connecting to the shop floor equipment during the production process through PLCs and being able to track and trace track the equipment on the floor in terms of energy efficiencies and uptime. So that would be one of the solutions that would probably be the most prominent from an IoT perspective that our customers would be looking into. We talked also about, you talked a little bit about servitization, I think you called it, where IoT can be leveraged actually on product that you sell in order to provide services for that product afterwards, so that you can get all the kind of information that you need from that product to do an on-time or offer an on-time service to your customers. So that would be another area. And then just general track and trace capabilities, through the whole logistics cycle. And I think you kind of mentioned that as well in your talk today, which is really looking at the status of fulfillment processes and goods in transit from inbound goods receipt through the manufacturing process, and then finally through fulfillment. So all of that could be tracked through IoT, and of course vendor managed inventory would be another example as well.
Yep, and we actually have another client who has load limits on their vehicles, and one of the things that they do is they pick up scrap as part of their delivery process. So they basically have to manage the load of the vehicle in real time, and if that vehicle winds up getting to its capacity, then they need to readjust routing. So that's information as well that can be published through the IoT, is to basically say this truck can no longer pick up any scrap, it needs to go back to the yard, so reallocate other trucks to do that scrap work.
Perfect. I think we still have some time for a few more. This is another one from Brian. How does this product manage complex BOMs that change dynamically?
So for a bill of materials that is dynamically changing, so I guess a couple things. If the bill of materials changes, we have the ability to substitute products in or use alternate products. And I don't know, again, because we're not having real-time conversation. So there's the concept of the bill of materials, which is all the products that possibly can go into the product. And then there's the concept of the routing itself, where there's the possibility that the routing might change. So SAP does have the ability to either identify substitute products or to insert a product that wasn't in the BOM. Both of those come out of the box. You can also change the routing process if need be by introducing a step in the routing process that will actually track the injection of that step. So for example, the best analogy I can give you is if you need a 30-foot length of something, whether it be pipe or banister or railway tie, and you don't have a 30-foot, but you do have 6 5-foots, you may introduce a whole bunch of new processing steps into that routing. So both those things are supported by SAP. And again, it's really just, you can have a name substitution or alternate product where you say, these are definitely alternate products that can be substituted for this given product, or you can insert new products in and be able to track the reason for the insertion. Hopefully that answered the question.
Okay, I think we have time for one more. What is the typical sequence of things when implementing a new ERP for a mill products company?
Okay, so thank you for the wiffle ball. This is an easy one. So the typical solution we'd implement in the initial footprint in terms of minimum viable scope is at a minimum the finance and costing piece. So we would set up the whole organization in there. We typically would implement procurement and at least inventory management. Manufacturing, it depends. So if you want to release very quickly and you have a manufacturing solution that works well today, you can integrate it in or you can roll it into the actual process itself. So really it's the financial side, it's the sales side, it's the procurement side, the material management / inventory management side, and then the production itself. That's the typical initial scope.
Thank you, Steve and Lorraine. To everyone else who joined us for today's webinar, I want to thank you and hope that you enjoyed today's presentation. I will be following up with everyone with a copy of today's PowerPoint deck and an additional follow-up with the recording of today's webinar. If you have any additional questions, feel free to send them to the contact information below. In addition, attached to this GoToMeeting is a handout with the Illumiti overview brochure if you'd like to find out any more information about Illumiti. Thank you again for joining today's presentation. I hope you have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.